right, welcome back. This is Dr. Gabe Roberts, the subconscious healer. Glad to have you back for another episode. Today, we're going to discuss a little bit more in depth of just kind of what trauma is, how the word itself can be misleading, and give us, give you a little bit better um, explanation for actually what the mechanism of trauma is whenever it happens into our neurology. Whenever we have an overwhelming moment, whenever something happens to us that it goes beyond our coping mechanisms, we actually have we have a traumatic wounding, and the wounding comes from the Greek word for wound. It's indicative of a wound, and trauma, like childhood trauma in particular, is a wounding of our psyche. And we don't have to understand it fully or not, but this wounding, and what I mean by understanding it is with our limited awareness, this wound that we obtain, that we have imprinted in us, um, it virtually influences all aspects of our life from then on. So it's a wound that persists, and it influences our behaviors, our social habits, all our relationships. It influences us, and it influences us the way we view ourselves. Oftentimes with trauma, there's a deep-seated shame, not good enough, not lovable enough. And this itself will skew and color and filter all of our potential thinking about ourselves, our world we live in, and our place in the world. Like any injury, this trauma always hurts whenever it's poked. And by poking, I mean, of course, getting triggered. So a trigger is something that happens to us on a regular basis, and we don't understand, we don't think about what it is that happens to us. A trigger is the ability of a holographic fragment of this memory, of this perception, of this wound to be instantly revived from any environmental stimuli that has a resonant frequency to that memory or a stray thought. So it can be environmental or it could be a stray thought. And we, as people, we have 15 to 50 times an hour, our mind is taking trips. So one of those potential trips, just a stray thought, is capable of reviving a fragment of that memory, which instantly retrieves it, suddenly siphons all of our perception back into a previous, much more emotionally affordable, potent experience. So it triggers the ability of a fragment of memory to be instantly revived from environmental stimuli or a stray thought, and suddenly it siphons all of our perceptions back into a previous, much more emotionally formidable experience. And as this happens, without any conscious awareness, our subconscious mind is suddenly living a resurrected past memory with all its original intensity. Now, triggers can be both good and bad, of course. A smell of warm apple pie can take you back to grandmother's kitchen, or a certain song, perhaps, suddenly makes you think of prom night. Likewise, a commercial airliner flying overhead that just does its routine work, carrying passengers from city to city, could also bring back the experience to a combat veteran of a scene where a B 52 bomber is flying overhead. So I think you get the idea. These triggers that we have are all indicative of a wounding that we experienced early on in our life. Now, whenever I say trauma, of course, I do mean that we can have this wound anytime in our life. We can, as adults, we can have a traumatic occurrence occur. We could have something like an Oklahoma City bombing, for example, or September 11th. And these are all traumatic experiences that we can endure, maybe a car accident, something like that that happens. But whenever I talk about childhood trauma, um, it is it is very um, important to understand that the most important influential memories that a person has, the most powerful memories we all carry, are the ones that are formed between the ages of 0 to 5 years old. At this moment, at conception on, we are the most absorbent we are. We're the most absorbent we've ever been and ever will be throughout our entire life. So at the moment of conception is when we actually learn the most. Any experience going on, mother's fear, um, maybe an argument with the mom and dad, maybe mother's stress about certain things, maybe even stress about a sudden pregnancy and feeling overwhelmed, like another mouth to feed, perhaps, or um, the baby's presence is going to be a lot. Maybe it's the wrong time during the mother's career. Maybe they're not financially prepared for a baby. It could even be something like a mother could have had multiple miscarriages, and these themselves were obviously very painful for her, very traumatic for her. And now suddenly she finds out she's pregnant and goes, "Oh, not again." That itself leaves an imprint in that developing fetus. And although it's off the radar of most professionals and doctors and things like that, these kinds of imprints are traumatic. They leave a holographic imprint that will skew and color and alter and influence this individual the rest of their life. And this gets confirmed in my office over and over and over again. And other people that do similar work to mine get the same confirmation. So I've mentioned trauma, I've mentioned hologram. So let's take a moment just to kind of talk about what a trauma is, other than just being defined by a wound that persists. A traumatic overwhelm is an emotional spike. So if you could picture in your mind, just like a wave length, a waveform that has up and down ripples, where the wave goes up, and these are called crests, and the wave goes down, and these are called troughs. Kind of like just a pattern of waveform, like you could see across a flat screen, waves going up and down, or even if you just picture in your mind what a steel calm pool of water looks like, and you drop a pebble in it, and you get these ripples that um, extend beyond where the pebble hit the water. Those are waves, right? And throughout the day, our emotional status is governed by waveform frequency. We have high moments, we have low moments. We have moments where we're laughing, we have moments where we're maybe upset because somebody cut us off, or a boss is breathing down the back of our neck, or we are wanting to get to our favorite restaurant and the service there is overwhelmed that day, so the food is cold, and it's kind of a one of those experiences that you wish you wouldn't even gone. So the whole drive home, you're upset. You know, those kind of things happen to us on a regular basis. And the waveform of our emotions are constantly reflecting that in the pattern of going up and down. So now, for a overwhelm to happen that creates a trauma, imagine that waveform having a tremendous spike, so a huge increase in neurological arousal. Now, as this increase in emotional neurological arousal starts to rise and the wave gets higher and higher and higher, there's a certain point that we have a set point in our nervous system to where there's a threshold that's the maximum our nervous system can handle. If we hit this level of neurological arousal, our body will basically short circuit and we would die. We would perish because our nervous system's obviously electrical. And if we hit too much of a spike of electrical activity, it's too much, and we would basically, perish. Nobody dies from a traumatic overwhelm, though. So think about the people that witnessed Titanic, the mothers and the children in those boats as they're watching the ship sink, and they're seeing all these people out in the water drowned. Um, or if a person survives September 11th, they're witnessing all the chaos, the turmoil, the screams, perhaps seeing, injured people laying around them. we can have an emotional spike in that moment, but we don't ever hit that threshold to where somebody sees something so overwhelming to where it kills them. And the reason why is because we have a protective system that monitors that neurological arousal. As it starts to rise, the moment before it hits threshold, that protective system kicks in and captures that emotional spike. So it captures everything going on in that moment and stores it in a holographic like um, pocket of consciousness. And that is now stored anywhere inside or outside of our body around us, influencing us. And the analogy I use in my book is imagine an old house on a hill somewhere, and there's a thunderstorm rolling in, and you see lightning, you hear thunder, and it's raining, and suddenly a flash of lightning hits the transformer. You see sparks fly, and all the power in that house goes out. Well, what happened? The lightning had so much potency behind it that when it struck the transformer, it obviously overrode the potential for that transformer to maintain it. The energy was too much. The spike was too excessive for that transformer to handle. Sparks flew, the power went out. So the same thing happens in us, but we never hit that point where the sparks fly and we go offline. And it's because of that protective mechanism. So whenever we are overwhelmed, particularly between 0 to 5, we have this emotional spike. That protective mechanism kicks in, zip files that emotional spike, and stores it in a pocket of consciousness anywhere inside or outside of our body. And these are stored holographic imprints. Anyone that does any kind of body work, like massage therapy, has witnessed the client of theirs when they're massaging, they hit a certain spot and suddenly the client is reliving a memory of something, and perhaps they start crying, or um, they have they have that emotion. What it is a trigger. That trigger comes right back, right? They call it a healing crisis. So anyone that does body work has been familiar with these kind of episodes where they're working on someone's body part, maybe a leg or a thigh, or maybe a spot in the back or somewhere, and they hit something and suddenly that emotional uh, turmoil goes up, and the person is seeing a flash of memory in their mind of that particular stored holographic imprint. So that's what a trauma is. It's a holographic imprint that is stored within our body. And the problem with that is our subconscious mind does not know that experience is over. And that's why whenever we are triggered, whenever we have um, that that pocket of consciousness go active, um, all the things start to occur as if that was happening in present time. And of course, that means emotional arousal with increased pulse, breathing, pupils dilate, sweating, hypervigilant activity, hypervigilant behavior. Um, all of those things start to happen because the body doesn't know it's over. So when these pockets of consciousness go active, um, there's a flashback, commonly referred to as a flashback. There's a burst of adrenaline, stress hormones, tightness, tension occurs in the body somewhere, muscle tension, pulse goes up, increased sweating, increased breathing, and even pain in that initial site where the holographic imprint was first imprinted. Pain can reoccur. And me as a trained as a chiropractor, I can tell you this. Um, Many times when people have chronic pain and we're trying to work on that physical body, we're doing manual adjustments, or we're doing ultrasound, or we could be doing some kind of modality, outside modality. It could be acupuncture, um, anything to work on alleviating that pain. And the pain goes away for a little bit, but comes back later, and it's been there for longer than 12 weeks. So, if a person's injured, like you just twisted your knee on the way into work today, that's an acute injury. that's not memory related. Now, there could be a memory related to it later, or a pocket of consciousness stored with that later. But after you've had pain for 12 weeks in a certain spot, I will guarantee it's memory related. There's something about it that is related to one of these stored holographic imprints. Back pain that doesn't go away, knee pain that stays there. Um, this is your mind, your subconscious mind's way of telling you something is there and something needs to be investigated a little further. So I've seen that many times. It's very common with athletes. It's common with people that do training to where they're taught or conditioned to work through pain. Sometimes I have worked with people that are golfers and they go out on the golf course. They swing their golf club a certain range. They exceed their range of normal movement just a little too much. Suddenly their back hurts. They go see a chiropractor. The chiropractor puts them on a plan, icing and adjusting and using whatever kind of modalities they may have, whether it's Graston, whether it's, traction, something like that. And then after a while, the chiropractor's plan starts to get towards the end, and they tell the person, "Okay, you're fully healed as much as they can get." And let's say the person goes back out on the golf course and goes to swing that golf club. His unconscious mind remembers that he hurt himself. And although the after 12 weeks, any tissue that's damaged is going to be fully repaired. Any ligaments, any blood vessels, any muscle, anything that's there will be fully repaired within 12 weeks. And that's also confirmed by Dr. John Sarno's work as well. Um, but it's just the normal stage for our tissue to heal. If there's still pain there, so like this golf swinger swings back and he gets to a certain spot where his unconscious mind says, "Oh, you did this before and you hurt us, you hurt yourself. So I'm going to put something here to remind you not to do that again." And suddenly the pain returns. And oftentimes the professionals will say, "Well, you have scar tissue there or something else." It is safeguarding, it is subconscious safeguarding, keeping that person from exceeding that range of motion again. So traumas can pop up in a number of ways, including this, but the ones that I'm getting at are the ones where we store some kind of overwhelming moment and uh, our nervous system, our subconscious mind does not know that overwhelming experience is over. And that's the foundation for when I was describing um, smelling pie and going back to grandmother's kitchen, or hearing the commercial jet go over and a veteran mistaking it for a B-52 bomber. Suddenly his mind is right back in the past, what Peter Levine calls the tyranny of the past. One of the aspects of trauma is it keeps us from being in the present, because when these holographic imprints are tricked, when they're triggered and our nervous system reacts as if they're happening right now, suddenly we're right back in that moment without any conscious awareness and without any permission. So the concept of holograms comes from uh, as our consciousness is holographic and our memories are holographic, come from two sources. Carl Pribram, a neuroscientist from Stanford, and his work with David Bohm, that they've indicated that the entire world, everything about what we see from dust to feathers to our memories to our five senses, how we see, smell, taste, touch, hear, and feel. So, or touch and feel, kind of the same thing. What we um, see, hear, feel, smell, and taste, all of those work through holographic principles, as well as the research that was done through what's called Gateway Process, a declassified CIA document where the U.S. Army um, and the CIA studied the human consciousness, the human mind, all aspects of the mental body, of course, for looking at things like remote viewing and telekinesis abilities. So these concepts of holographic um, consciousness and how our mind stores things holographically are really strong theories. They're very, very strong theories backed by a lot of research. So, the childhood trauma, whenever we have something happen to us, um, it stores these imprints in us, like pockets of consciousness that will influence us throughout the rest of our life. And it's not like Gabor Mate says. He says trauma is not what happens to you; it's what happens. It's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens. So trauma isn't what happened; it's what happens inside of you as a result of what takes place. And what he's referring to is these holographic imprints derive meaning. So these things are so deep that they elicit body feelings. Those body feelings will give a person certain perspectives that have nothing to do with actually what happened. So another way of saying what he said is, um, you're not messed up because of the trauma that happened to you. That might be um, new for some people. That might be something kind of difficult to grasp, but it's not the trauma that messed you up. It is how your body encoded that trauma and how it's deriving meaning from that trauma. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. Whenever a child has the impression that they're not lovable, they will grow into an adult that is a people pleaser because they have the perception, I have to be good to deserve being loved. And so they become very people pleasing. They become a workaholic. They're the ones that develop a compulsive concern for the emotional needs of others while they completely disregard their own emotional needs. High risk factor for illness. They, if they get the impression that they're a disappointment or they are not useful, and oftentimes the off comment of a parent saying, um, you should be ashamed of yourself. That's what happened to a child. That's what they heard at some critical moment. And so they develop a perception of, I must not disappoint anyone. Now they have uh, a behavioral pattern of, I'm responsible for how others people feel and what they experience. And these people will work themselves to death trying to not disappoint anyone. So these are just a couple of patterns that come to be from childhood trauma. So, or these emotional spikes that occur. Let me take a moment to discuss trauma in another way because I'm talking about these things and it's very easy for people to misunderstand the word trauma or misinterpret it. So, although trauma means wound, it's more epidemic than we're aware of. And the word itself has become such a slogan, such a catchphrase, a buzzword that is carelessly tossed around as ordinary, familiar conversation. And oftentimes it's been watered down so much that it's disproportionate. It's diluted in the magnitude of the implications that it has. And of course, these are completely off the radar of most professionals, and it doesn't cause a blip on the radar of doctors, healthcare providers. It certainly, I had no lectures on this during my entire education in both functional medicine, chiropractic, and earning a diploma in nutrition. Never heard one concept of, not one breath of what I'm discussing right now. And all too often, this is the whole reason why the people are going to a doctor, a chiropractor, a professional in the first place. So, what I want to talk about now is um, how this perhaps ignored, belittled, denied misunderstanding of untreated cause of human suffering, as the words of Peter Levine puts it. Let's talk about those originations a bit. When it comes to trauma, we're going to differentiate two different aspects of it. There's something called big T trauma, and this is the signature that I once knew very intimately. Okay. It involves instantaneous, unconscious responses, such as being triggered the way I discussed with mind and body, and is associated with these coping reactions and identifiable, painful, and overwhelming events from childhood and decades later. So, big T trauma is, of course, the one that is associated when things happen to people during moments of their life, during vulnerable moments of their life that should not have happened. So, big T trauma is when things occur to people that should not have happened. And of course, this includes being physically or sexually abused as a child, witnessing or being involved in a violent crime, a natural disaster, somebody surviving, a tornado hitting their house. That's big T trauma. A school shooting, big T trauma. A very serious car accident, a very malevolent divorce. Okay, a very, very nasty, long drawn out divorce, a sudden loss of a parent. These are all these are all experiences that would meet the criteria for big T trauma, and additionally, they meet the criteria for what we would call ACE scores, Adverse Childhood Experience Survey or study. Okay, so big T trauma is categorized in circumstances that are always considered life threatening to the individual. So life threatening. And of course, these are the ones that have a little bit more awareness. Like if a child was sexually abused, that can register as being traumatic in the mind of professionals, right? But the other category is the one that's more elusive, the one that is deceitful, and that is called little T trauma. And this is more elusive because people carry the scars of it throughout their lives without any recognition of it at all. These little T traumas are often interpreted as unfortunate, quote, life events, unquote. And this is, of course, in order to give it a gentler and more benign attribute and allows it to escape under the radar of really what it is. It's an injury to the psyche. And even more disturbing and alarming is little T trauma is universal. It's applicable to nearly every person in this culture. Uh, I do a lot of studying on childhood trauma, and I'll say that it affects everyone in our culture, regardless of your status, skin color, your gender, your income bracket. Trauma affects every one of us. The only people on planet Earth that are not impacted by childhood trauma in some way. In other words, they're someone not carrying little T trauma is going to be isolated pockets of populations that are hunter gatherers, aboriginal, and tribal people that are untouched by culture, untouched by society, because the way our society operates itself um, induces trauma. Okay. Um, just a quick, we'll just kind of talk about this very briefly. If I were to ask you, where did the first addictions come from? The very first addictions in people. When's the first time we ever had pain? Right. Um, there can be some speculation as of pinpointing it, maybe little bits here and there. Whenever somebody, years and years and years ago, experience some kind of trauma and suddenly they have pain and they become an addict, but it's not a universal thing. It's not something that impacted large populations at a time. So did this start to happen where it became much more endemic? That is during the Industrial Revolution. So during the Industrial Revolution, that started to break families apart. So before that moment, think about Little House on the Prairie, and you'd see the dad, the mom, and the family working together on a farm, operating it. Everyone has a piece, and it's one big happy family, so to speak. The Industrial Revolution happens, and now that takes the dad from the family. So it takes the dad, he has to go into town, he has to go closer to these factories, and it breaks the family apart. Now the mother has to step up her game. Now the mother is not only protecting the house and the farm, she's also running the farm and taking care of all the kids. So there's a lot more stress load on her, whether dad is away from the house now. So there's pain with that. Whenever families are separated from each other, it's not helpful for the psyche. We've gotten so used to it that it's a routine for us to get up in the morning and leave our loved ones and go to a job we don't like. So it all started with this industrial revolution, and that's where addictions really started to show up on a global scale. Addictions to tobacco, addictions to alcohol. Yes, we had those substances before this time, but they were used for ceremonies. Think back to Indians smoking a peace pipe. Were they addicted to tobacco? No, it was a ceremony. There were celebrations, and people would drink alcohol. They would get drunk. They would have a good celebration, and then right back to on when Monday comes around, people are right back to their normal routine without that urge, without that tendency to want to numb out or drown our sorrows or pain, with alcohol. Those things weren't there until families started to get separate. And so just kind of a side note on how these things are to be and how prevalent little t trauma is, how it affects us globally. And little t trauma, okay, I talked about big T trauma. Little t trauma is not only universal, but it would be accurate to describe these uh, with events that were supposed to happen but did not happen. Okay. So again, if we look at big T trauma is whenever there was something that uh, was not supposed to happen but did happen, like sexual abuse, right? That's big T trauma. When things happen to people that should not have happened. So sexual abuse, a violent crime, etc. Little T trauma is described as when good things were supposed to happen to a person, to a child, and did not happen. So when something good was supposed to happen, yet it did not happen. And this is why, one of the reasons why it's so elusive. It's not associated with the life-threatening circumstances. So it's easy dismissible. It's not quite as glamorous. It doesn't have the affinity that the big T trauma does when we're discussing it. Little T traumas could be getting bullied by peers. It's the offhand or harsh critical comment from a parent at certain vulnerable times. The denial of a hug from a parent or a key caregiver during specific moments. The denial of a hug is all it takes to wound a child's psyche in a little t way, little t trauma way that completely gets overlooked. Now, I see this all the time with a number of clients who contact me and say that uh, they don't have any childhood trauma. They don't have any childhood trauma at all. They had great life. Their family was really good. And I listen compassionately. And what I see is a person who's, again, the little t trauma is elusive. It's not on their radar. They don't understand what it is. They don't under they're considering childhood trauma to be something under the big T category, which in cases it's not. Little T trauma could also be a recent breakup, getting cheated on, the loss of a pet, getting laid off of a job. Those are things that are traumatic. They're hurtful to the psyche. But again, they don't usually cause a blip on the radar of what a person would consider to be a traumatic event. And part of this little t traumas get mixed along with the common adages of suck it up or get over it or that's life when something is perceived as not that big a deal happens. And again, this is part of our cultural surroundings and the way that we've been conditioned to believe certain things about us. So it's so conditioned in us that we're taught as children when we hear something that's painful we're immediately taught to recite um, the common precept that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. So, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Now, these words are so intertwined within our society that I would say, whenever the minute I start saying sticks and stones, you immediately, I'll just say this, were triggered in a way that you could finish reading that sentence in your mind. You knew where I was going with that. Now, I want you to consider the case of a client of mine, 36-year-old Nikki, and she, like many ahead of her, had a collection of doctors for her chronic illnesses, including chiropractors, naturopathic doctors, functional medicine, and biological medicine doctors. Now, she had experienced improvements in her symptoms, but they seemed to always be very short lived and they would return within a few months. And on her list of conditions were chronic reoccurring pain, fatigue, neurological complications, and recurring infections. On her paperwork, whenever the paperwork asked her for the reason for seeking out psychosomatic medicine, she wrote chronic Lyme. So when Nikki and I began working together, I asked her subconscious mind to take me to the source of this symptom. And it took us to a time when she was 4 years old. I prompted her to share with me what she was sensing in this moment. And she said, I'm hurting. I'm hurting. Tears were coming down her face. And I asked her, what is it that you're becoming aware of that's making you hurt? And she went on to tell me that she was 4 years old and she was hiding under a desk from her mother. And her mother had just told her, I like you better when you're sick. You're not in my way as much. Now, knowing what you understand about the subconscious mind from previous podcasts, how it's the most powerful goal achieving agency known to humanity, and it cannot judge a single impression put in it. It just takes whatever you put in it and turns it to form, no questions asked. And the foundation of that subconscious is getting built between 0 to 5, like a jigsaw puzzle being put together in pieces. You can see why I like you better when you're sick. You're not in my way as much. Became later on a woman who, without any conscious awareness, without any reason why, without permission, continued to manifest chronic illness. Furthermore, this case, Nikki's case, fits under the category of little t trauma. None of the previous doctors had asked her about trauma, and she herself was under the influence of thinking she did not have trauma. She was under the full impression that she had a completely normal upbringing. So the most harmful, elusive, deceptive, and misunderstood of the traumas are the little t ones. And the most devastating ones across the board is the lack of an emotional connection with a non stressed, nurturing parent during these critical developmental years. And an infant child is just as dependent on breathing air and drinking breast milk as they are dependent on having this emotional connection with a parent. So seeing these words of I like you better when you're sick, you're not in my way as much. Although it fits the old adage of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, that gives you an idea of how falsely programmed things are in our culture. Uh, a more accurate description and truthful way of putting this would be as Cher once sang in her song, words are like weapons. They wound sometimes. And of course, that wound would be the little t trauma. Now, the wounding of trauma can happen in a number of ways, not just horrible situations like big T trauma, but also morally correct, ethical, loving parents that were supposed to do something and yet did not. Childhood trauma falls under this category of little t trauma, and it can occur simply by not addressing the requirements necessary for healthy growth and development. This little t trauma and human infants, the first and most foundational need they have is for connection, and it's a need to be loved. Now, I put love in quotes whenever I say it because I've witnessed the word love make people suddenly digress in their healing journey, and they begin to sabotage themselves, binge eat junk food, and drink high amounts of alcohol when they had no intention of doing so, because the word love uh, was associated with destructive behavior. So, such as somebody getting struck and, a man hitting a woman and saying, I did that because I love you. Well, if you use the word love and that triggers a perception, suddenly that person's subconscious mind starts to act out the behaviors associated with destructive behavior. So, love, in my definition, means only seeing the best in someone or something or life or a person or yourself. So that is some examples of big T and little t trauma. Again, I want to thank you for joining us today and invite your friends or family or anyone that you feel resonates with the message we're trying to share here, because we need to have a greater understanding of trauma. That way we can get to the roots of it and begin to heal ourselves, heal our communities, heal our society, and and heal the world.